clergy abuse scandal. U.S. Catholic bishops begin their spring General Assembly in Baltimore. What they're saying about combating sexual misconduct. In God We Trust, an update on an atheist's attempt to remove the motto from U.S. currency. Open to dialogue, analysis of the Vatican's document on church teaching and gender theory. And on the road again, Pope Francis reveals a country he'd like to visit next year. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 11th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. The head of the U.S. Bishops challenges his fellow clergy members to root out the evil of sex abuse from the church. American bishops meet in Baltimore to confront that crisis. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us from that high-stakes meeting. Wyatt?
Good evening, Jason. The bishops are discussing a wide range of issues, from vocations to the death penalty. But the biggest issue on the agenda this week is how to hold bishops accountable in wake of the sex abuse scandal. There are a variety of opinions about how to do that, but everyone agrees that the biggest challenge facing the church right now is that.
Come, Holy Spirit, give us the strength to humbly match the courageous witness of those abuse survivors with a boldness of reform for the Church in the United States.
With that prayer, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo opens this week's spring assembly of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. DiNardo didn't waste any time directly addressing the need for bishops to do more to address the abuse crisis.
We must now build upon the foundation of the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, respond to Pope Francis's call for universal accountability, and add clear new procedures to our existing protection programs.
The bishop's agenda is guided by a letter from Pope Francis called a motu proprio. The Holy Father requests priests and nuns worldwide to report abuse and possible cover-ups to church authorities. The bishops laid out the main tenets of the letter on their new website, USCCBprevention.org. Despite the bishop's efforts, some victims of clergy sex abuse say it's not enough. James Faluzak, who says he was abused by a priest as a teenager, joined other victims outside the conference to voice their concerns. Faluzak, who advocates for other victims, says bishops cannot police themselves, and more needs to be done to have independent lay investigators.
I'd like to see a national board of some sort make the appointments to the local boards. There needs to be some sort of national oversight.
Oversight is exactly what Dr. Francesco Cesareo spoke about during a speech to the bishops this morning. He's the chair of the National Review Board, a lay group which makes recommendations to prevent sex abuse. He agrees that a lay commission is needed.
And for the outside people, for the faithful, for society in general, to have bishops policing bishops doesn't send the kind of signal that there is going to be that level of accountability, because we've seen that has not worked.
The bishops will be voting on a number of proposals related to bishops' accountability on Thursday. That will give the bishops more time to discuss the crisis tomorrow and consider how they will move forward. Jason?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Bishops' Conference in Baltimore. Thanks, Wyatt. We're joined by the Assistant General Secretary of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Jonathan Reyes. Dr. Reyes, thank you for joining us from Baltimore. The head of the National Review Board said today he's uncomfortable with bishops investigating bishops. Can bishops do this work?
That's a fair question, Jason, and I think an important one. I think a precedent says something here. I think that what we've seen recently in West Virginia, what we've seen in New York, what we've seen in Los Angeles certainly indicates that a system driven by the bishops can in fact deliver. It's worth noting that in all those systems there's a high lay involvement. So lay involvement, helping bishops do this, I think that so far what we've seen is a sign that if that continues, it can be done.
And that's what some of the bishops spoke about today, was that the bishop, the metropolitan, the head of an archdiocese can appoint lay people to help him in this investigation.
I think it was very interesting and worth noting just how often and how many bishops insisted on the lay part in their questions for clarification that we saw this morning. So if you're taking the temperature of things, I see the emphasis on lay involvement pretty much unanimous and consistent. So I think we can see that going forward.
And speaking of that temperature, when we look across the board at Catholics, a new poll from Pew finds a quarter of U.S. Catholics have scaled back Mass attendance. A quarter say they've cut their parish offerings. How in the world do you turn that around?
Well, it starts with what they're doing this weekend with the bishops, is just putting in place certain things that say we're taking this seriously. We've been listening to victims. We've been in conversation with one another, and we're going to put concrete steps in place, and we're going to listen to you. We're going to have lay involvement as we do this. It starts with that move, and then lay people watch, and they will see, does this deliver? Are what they're promising, is this coming true? Are the commitments they're making and considering making over the next few days going to be honored? So I think it'll take time, and it'll take actually activating the things that they're moving on. I think the most important thing for us as lay people here is to continue to tell the bishops, here's what we expect. We expect you to hear us, and we want to see concrete response to this. So it's a long haul, but there's a way back.
And as a layman serving the U.S. Bishops' Conference, are they listening to lay people? Are they listening to the cries of people across the country who are saddened by what they've seen the last year with this priest abuse scandal?
You know, if there's one thing I can say about what I've witnessed so far is this whole tenor of the bishops is basically resolve. And I know they've been listening to laity because I see the correspondence, I see the listening groups, I've been to the meetings with victims. And so I know they're doing it, and the resolve that they're displaying this weekend will be the real test of that. And I think laity should be watching this next couple days with exactly that question in mind. Do I see them listening to us? But I think the answer to that is yes from where I sit.
Okay, well, Jonathan Reyes, Assistant General Secretary for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Jason.
Stay with EWTN for much more of the Bishops' meeting. News Nightly will have reports all week, and you can also visit our partners at Catholic News Agency and the National Catholic Register. Southern Baptists are also fighting sex abuse. The annual meeting starts today in Alabama, and their main topic is abuse by clergy and staff. The nation's largest Protestant denomination likely will set up rules for kicking out parishes that cover up allegations. President Trump blames the Biden-Obama administration for the crisis in Venezuela. He answered our questions today at the White House. He says his administration is looking at giving Venezuelans temporary protection in the United States. White House correspondent Mark Irons asked the president about that and much more. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Jason. The president has taken a tough stance against Central American migrants. He believes they should wait in Mexico as their claims for asylum in the U.S. are processed. But he also admits Venezuela is a country in crisis, so we asked if he'll give safe harbor to migrants fleeing that country. Do immigrants from Venezuela deserve asylum in the U.S., and why haven't you given them
We're looking at that, and we're very much involved with the Venezuela crisis. It's a horrible thing, a horrible situation. It's been brewing for many years. It really started in the worst form during the Biden-Obama administration, but it's been brewing for a long time.
Will you give them temporary protected status?
So we're looking at that very strongly. We're looking at it.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has advocated for temporary protected status for Venezuela. I also asked the president today about the possibility of dialogue with Iran. Sanctions on the country have been reimposed after President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal last year. Tension between the two countries has increased in recent weeks, with threatening rhetoric on both sides. Have you spoken to the leadership in Iran? Are you hopeful about peaceful dialogue with Iran?
I hope that everything works out with Iran. Iran is a country that now, because of all of the sanctions and other things, is a much different country than when I came here. When I came here, they were all over the place causing terror, causing problems. They're not doing that right now. And I think they respect the United States right now much more than they ever have. So Iran's got a lot of problems, and I'd like to help them with those problems. We'll see what happens. But they have tremendous inflation. Their money is worthless. You can't buy a loaf of bread. It's a lot of problems in Iran. That's a lot different than it was 2.5 years ago. And big things were sanctions. But I think the biggest thing was and the most important was when I terminated the Iran nuclear deal, which was an incompetent deal.
The president is in Iowa tonight, and there for an overlapping visit, former Vice President Joe Biden. Want a preview of the 2020 campaign? The president called Joe Biden a dummy today, with Biden responding the president is an existential threat to this country. Jason.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. Mark Irons, White House correspondent. Thanks, Mark. President Trump's pick to be a federal judge in Michigan pulls out. Michael Bogren lost support from some Republican senators because of his legal arguments against a Catholic farmer. Bogren's cousin Margot Cleveland writes on Twitter in part, "I just learned that my cousin Mike Bogren has sent White House a letter withdrawing his name from consideration of the district court position. For those celebrating this as a win for religious liberty, it is not. It is a Pyrrhic victory at best." And the work of Catholic Charities comes up at a Senate hearing. It happened as Acting Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McAleenan testified about the southern border.
So I met with Catholic Charities a week before last in Guatemala, hearing about the work they're doing, their concerns about programs that are frozen, and that's the kind of consideration we'll be looking at with the frozen funding to see what's working and what's appropriate to continue.
Democratic senators also questioned McAleenan about the treatment of children crossing the border. The hearing surrounded a bill sponsored by Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham. The lone Republican congressman calling for President Trump's impeachment leaves a group of House conservatives. Michigan Representative Justin Amash left the Freedom Caucus. He also says he's not yet ruled out running for president as a libertarian. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden says 8 years of President Trump would change the United States forever.
He's a threat, in my view, a threat to our core values. And folks, the fact of the matter is that 4 years of Donald Trump will be viewed as an aberration in American history. 8 years will fundamentally change who we are as a nation.
Biden, a Catholic, was campaigning today in Iowa. Should "In God We Trust" be cut from U.S. money? Well, the Supreme Court rejects a case from an atheist who wanted it gone. The justices decided not to hear his case. Coming up, analysis of the Vatican's new document about gender identity and church teaching. And Pope Francis says God's love is free of charge, but there is a way we can pay him back. Thanks for watching EWTN News Nightly. I'm Jason Calvi, in for Lauren Ashburn. It's the race to be Britain's next Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson is the frontrunner. 10 candidates are on the ballot to replace Theresa May. She stepped down last week as Conservative Party leader. Boris Johnson promises to lead Britain out of the European Union by the end of October, with or without a deal with the EU. The Church rejects the idea people can choose their gender. The Vatican's Congregation for Catholic Education put out the new document. It calls for students to learn the full original truth of masculinity and femininity. The 31-page report is called "Male and Female, He Created Them." Moral theologian Joan Kingsland tells Catholic News Agency it provides much-needed clarity about the truth of the human person. There are lifestyles which enslave the person and leave the person in darkness about the true good and real happiness. Father Robert Gahl is an ethics professor at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross. He joins us from Rome. Father, thank you very much. Now, this document rejects the idea that people can change their genders, but it also calls for a path of dialogue. Was that the right approach to take?
Definitely. It's really important for us to recognize that gender depends upon sexuality. This is important just in terms of our own human reason, in terms of philosophy. It's also very important because of our Christian faith, that we believe that we are embodied individuals and that we are saved by a man who was brought to us by his mother, by the Blessed Virgin Mary. So the right response that the Church is giving us right now is to enter into dialogue, but at the same time to reason about the fact that gender depends upon sexuality, and sexuality is dyadic. It's dimorphic. One is either male or female, a man or a woman.
But there are critics, you know, who will say the concepts in this report are out of date. What do you say to them?
Well, some people are saying that the Church needs to dialogue, and in fact what the Church is doing is opening dialogue by asserting truths that all scientists recognize, which is throughout the animal kingdom within biology. Sexuality is there for reproduction. Among us humans, it's procreation because we participate in God's creative power by engendering new human life, which has a spiritual soul. The document is very careful from the Congregation for Catholic Education to say that every child has a right to a mother and a father, because being brought up by a man and a woman helps one to be well-rounded in all ways in terms of one's own sexual identity.
Now, the Vatican says this document will address a crisis in sexual education. So what is that crisis?
Well, there really is a great crisis today that this Vatican document is helping to give instructions to all the institutions around the world, especially Catholic institutions, regarding how to address these challenging times in our culture, what I think can be properly called an anthropological heresy, which is a form of dualism, which really separates our own individuality from our embodiment by saying that we can be whatever we want to be, when in fact our being is a gift from God according to a specific nature and a specific sexuality. And therefore now all school institutions, all educational institutions around the world, especially those that are Catholic, are challenged to recognize and to promote a real identity according to one's own sexuality, as a boy or a girl, as a man or a woman, as male or female.
So then this will be put into place in Catholic schools across the world. How?
Well, this is a real challenge because in many jurisdictions, it's certainly true in some states in the United States, there are now civil restrictions, even prohibitions, to recognize certain forms of what is really proper gender identity according to one's own sexuality. In some places, this is viewed as discrimination, which is really quite bizarre. If I'm a man, to say that if you consider me a man, that's somehow discriminatory. Because there are some jurisdictions in the U.S. that want people to be able to affirm themselves to be whatever they would like to be, not what they truly are. So here, the Vatican, the Catholic Church, we have our feet on the ground and we're saying, you are what you are. You are what nature speaks of you. You are according to your own bodily identity.
Okay, Father Robert Gahl, ethics professor at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jason. God bless you.
Pope Francis says next year he wants to visit Iraq.
Un pensiero insistente mi acompaña pensando al Irak.
The Holy Father yesterday shared that hope. He was meeting with members of a group that helps Eastern Rite churches. He also says leaders who speak of peace but sell weapons will face the wrath of God.
Questo rapporto di gratuità con Dio è quello che ci aiuterà poi a averlo con gli altri.
Pope Francis shares a theological tip at his daily Vatican Mass. He tells the faithful God's love is free of charge. The only things we must give in return are an open heart and the willingness to serve others. Up next, an update on the status of the final abortion clinic in Missouri. And a new study examines how Americans view the clergy sex abuse crisis. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Jason Calvi. Lauren Ashburn is off tonight. Actress Busy Phillips testified in defense of abortion. Republican Louis Gohmert last week quizzed her. It came after abortion survivor Melissa Ohden told lawmakers that babies born and unborn have value.
Once she's born, would you agree that she is a person in being?
Yeah, I see. I'm not speaking about birth, sir.
Okay,
I'm speaking about abortion.
Well, I appreciate
The actress was part of the hearing on abortion. And Christina Bennett of the Family Institute of Connecticut urged the committee to protect life. She said, abortion is not a victimless act. You just can't hear the voices of those who have been silenced and discarded. And a judge says Missouri's only abortion clinic can stay open, at least for now. Planned Parenthood sought the ruling while the case makes its way through the courts. The state health department last month wouldn't renew the clinic's license to perform abortions. The state cites worries about patient safety and failed abortions. A new poll finds a majority of Americans view the Catholic clergy sex abuse crisis as an ongoing problem. According to the Pew Research Center, 79% of U.S. adults say the recent reports of sexual abuse and misconduct by Catholic priests and bishops reflect ongoing problems that are still happening in the church. Far fewer, 12%, think the recent reports reflect things that have happened in the past and mostly don't happen anymore. Joining me now is Greg Smith, one of the lead authors of the study. He's Associate Director of Research for the Pew Research Center. Greg, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
These numbers are really fascinating. 69% of U.S. Catholics you polled say this is an ongoing problem, whereas a quarter of American Catholics say this is a problem from the past. What do you make of those differences?
Well, the numbers that you just cited are some of what I think are the most striking findings in this survey. The data make clear that this issue, this crisis, is definitely on the minds of American Catholics. Virtually all of the Catholics that we interviewed told us that they've heard about this issue. Many of them tell us that they're talking about it with their friends and family. And as you said, 7 in 10 American Catholics think this is an ongoing problem. They do not think the recent reports simply reflect things that happened in the past and that don't go on anymore.
So U.S. bishops have a major problem looking at all this. They're meeting right now in Baltimore. Your report comes out today. One of the things in the report found that a quarter of American Catholics have reduced their offerings to their local parish. What do you make of those numbers, and what is it going to mean for the bishops gathering in Baltimore?
Well, what the numbers tell me is that this issue is affecting the behavior of American Catholics. It's affecting the way that they practice their faith. As you mentioned, a quarter of American Catholics tell us that they are attending Mass less often than before because of this issue. And a similar share, about a quarter of American Catholics, say they've reduced the amount of money that they've donated to their churches and to their dioceses. So this is having a real impact on Catholics in the pews.
So they'll be maybe watching what's happening. It sounds like your research found that people are talking about this issue. The bishops are meeting in Baltimore. We'll see what they can agree on and how the American people will then respond to that action item in Baltimore. I'm curious, of the Catholics you polled, 55% said Pope Francis has done an excellent or a good job handling this crisis, whereas when they are polled about how the U.S. bishops as a whole have done this, I think the number 36% said they have done a good or an excellent job. What do you make of that difference?
Well, what that suggests to me is that Catholics in the United States are really differentiating between different levels of the hierarchy. You're right, Pope Francis, on balance, gets positive ratings from American Catholics for the way he's handled the recent reports on this issue. Now, to be sure, there are plenty of American Catholics who have concerns about the way Pope Francis has handled it, but still, on balance, he gets positive marks. Most Catholics, or at least half of American Catholics, also give their own bishop positive marks for the way he has handled the issue. But the American bishops as a whole, they come in for a little more criticism. Only about a third of American Catholics give the American bishops as a whole positive ratings for their handling of the issue.
Is there, when you look at those numbers that you're talking about here, is there a correlation in this Catholic opinion between those who go to Mass frequently and maybe those who only go to Mass on Christmas or Easter, for example?
There definitely is. As on so many issues, we see pretty big differences between Catholics who say they attend Mass regularly, at least once a week, and those who say they attend Mass less often. Those Catholics who say they attend Mass regularly are both less likely to say they've donated less as a response to the issue, and they're more likely to give Pope Francis and their own bishop and the American bishops as a whole positive ratings for the handling of the issue. That's not to paint too rosy a picture. To be sure, many Mass-attending Catholics have real concerns on this front, but overall they're more positive than those who attend less often.
So much in this report to look at. It's all on your website, so if anybody at home wants to read the full review, they can pick it up at the Pew website as well. So
they certainly can, pewresearch.org.
Okay, Greg Smith, Associate Director of Research for the Pew Research Center. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And finally tonight, a young man recruited to play college basketball says he became a better Catholic after quitting the team. Keegan Ruddy played for Christopher Newport University in 2013, but he also battled depression and anxiety. He left the squad after his freshman year. Ruddy says he was healed by diving deeper into Catholicism. He now works as a Focus Catholic missionary, Focus, the Fellowship of Catholic University Students. Ruddy spent 2 years at Mount St. Mary's in Maryland, and this fall he's headed to the Focus Support Center in Colorado. For more on this story, including the Catholic athletes who inspired Keegan, visit the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Jason Calvi. We thank you so much for watching us tonight. We're back tomorrow for more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.